Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the desert, the kind of place where the horizon is an endless stretch of sand and the sun beats down with a relentless fury. Picture this: no roads, no convenience stores, just vast stretches of arid land where life seems impossible. But in this unforgiving environment, a surprising ally stands tall and proud. The Bedouins, those legendary desert nomads, weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And their secret, the camel. Without this creature, it's almost certain that the Bedouins wouldn't have made it as far as they did in history. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Survive a desert with a camel. That sounds like something straight out of a survival show. Right? Well, here's the thing. Most of us would probably keel over from the heat. But the Bedouins, they've got a way of using camels that made this extreme environment their home. You probably won't survive this adventure. But don't worry, you'll be okay. Just sit back, relax, and let me take you through how camels were the ultimate desert companions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you are in the world right now and what time it is. It's always fun to see where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert, with its extreme temperature swings and barren landscape, is one of the most hostile places on Earth. But if you had to live there, you'd probably want a companion who could withstand everything the environment threw at you. That companion, for the Bedouins, was the camel. Think about it. How else could a people who wandered across such vast, dry expanses possibly survive without an animal that was as adapted to the desert as they were? Camels were more than just a mode of transportation. They were practically the Bedouins' lifeline. Picture this. Without the camel, they would have had to face the deadly desert by foot, or rely on slower, less reliable animals. That's right. No easy strolls through the dunes, but with a camel by their side, the Bedouins could travel farther, faster, and more efficiently. They could go for days without water, survive in intense heat, and cover incredible distances. In fact, a camel could walk up to 40 miles a day. Imagine doing that in a place where every step feels like it could be your last. But let's take a step back. What made the camel so perfect for the desert at first off? Their bodies were perfectly suited for the harsh conditions. They've got thick, long eyelashes and ear hairs to keep sand out. Which, I don't know about you, sounds like a pretty useful feature if you're trekking through a storm of sand. Their tough, leathery feet allowed them to walk on hot, shifting sand without sinking in, like a natural snowshoe for the desert. And, of course, those iconic humps. They're not just for show. They store fat, which is converted into energy when food and water are scarce. This means that when a Bedouin could go days without finding food, the camel could still be their reliable partner, powering them through. Of course, that doesn't mean the desert was an easy place to live. The Bedouins had to adapt to the harsh environment just as much as their camels did. They knew the terrain like the back of their hands, where to find water, when to rest, and how to make the most of their resources. But most importantly, they understood that camels were more than just a means of getting from one place to another. They were part of the Bedouin identity. The relationship between Bedouin and camel was deep, built on mutual reliance and respect. In fact, The camel was so integral to their survival that Bedouin life revolved around the camel's needs and rhythms. Historians still argue whether the Bedouins could have made their way across such vast desert expanses without their trusty camels. Some believe that their entire way of life would have been impossible without them. Others suggest that, given the Bedouins' intimate knowledge of the land, they might have figured out some other way to get around. Regardless of which side of the debate you fall on, it's clear that camels played an irreplaceable role in the Bedouin way of life. And it wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about thriving in a place where survival was anything but certain. Let's talk about camels, and not just as vehicles of the desert. Sure, they carried Bedouins across endless sand dunes. But the relationship between these people and their camels was far deeper than simply being beasts of burden. These camels were symbols, companions, and even part of the very fabric of Bedouin society. Imagine the sheer amount of trust and interdependence involved. When your very life depends on an animal, it's no small matter. The Bedouins viewed camels not only as their primary means of transport, but also as sacred creatures, woven into the very essence of their culture. In fact, the camel was so important to the Bedouins that it became a symbol of status, wealth, and power. A family's wealth could be measured by the number of camels they owned, much in the same way a farmer's wealth might be measured by their cattle. Some families would even pass down prized camels through generations. These weren't just any animals. They were part of the family's legacy. But beyond being a source of wealth, camels were integral to social rituals and even religion. In many Bedouin societies, the camel played a starring role in important ceremonies. For example, when a Bedouin was preparing for a wedding, camels were often gifted as part of the bride's dowry. The camels were a tangible symbol of the groom's ability to provide for the bride and her family. They were also used in religious sacrifices, highlighting their sacred status. In fact, there are accounts of camels being led to the altar as part of ceremonies that involved giving thanks to Allah or invoking blessings for the future. But the camel wasn't just a tool for survival or a gift at weddings. It was a symbol of strength, endurance, and resilience. It was said that to be compared to a camel was one of the highest compliments you could receive in Bedouin society. If someone described you as strong like a camel, it wasn't just about physical power. It was about having the stamina to withstand hardships and the endurance to keep going no matter what. This speaks to the deep respect the Bedouins had for these animals, as they saw in them the very qualities they valued most in themselves. Historians still debate the extent to which the Bedouins anthropomorphized their camels. Some suggest that camels were revered almost like family members, receiving the same level of respect and care as children. Others argue that while the Bedouins had great respect for their camels, the relationship was strictly pragmatic. Either way, it's clear that these animals weren't just beasts of burden. They were woven into the fabric of Bedouin identity. Without camels, the Bedouins might never have been able to create the intricate social structures and cultural practices that defined their societies. This connection between the Bedouins and their camels wasn't just about respect. It also involved deep emotional bonds. The camels, with their distinctive personalities and complex behaviors, were often seen as trusted companions, sharing in the hardships of desert life. In the harsh desert environment, where every day was a struggle for survival, these animals were the reliable constant. They were often treated with great care, and a strong bond could form between the Bedouin and their camel. Some stories even speak of Bedouins who, upon losing their camel, experience true grief, much like the loss of a loved one. This emotional attachment was reflected in the way the camels were cared for. Bedouins understood that in order to keep their camels healthy and strong, they had to feed them well, provide shelter, and protect them from danger. In turn, the camels would offer their strength, endurance, and loyalty, helping the Bedouins carry heavy loads, travel long distances, and survive the desert's relentless heat. They weren't just animals. They were partners in the Bedouins' daily struggle for life. Perhaps one of the most fascinating things about the Bedouin-camel relationship was the role of the camel in Bedouin poetry and storytelling. Camels often appeared as central figures in the epic tales passed down through generations. These stories weren't just about travel. They were about the bond between man and beast, the challenges faced in the desert, and the strength needed to overcome them. The camel was frequently portrayed as a heroic figure, its patience and strength standing in stark contrast to the capriciousness of the desert itself. Historians still argue whether the camel's prominence in these stories reflects the central role of camels in Bedouin life, or whether it's more of a cultural exaggeration. But one thing is clear: the camel wasn't just a practical tool. It was a revered figure in the stories that helped shape the Bedouin worldview. By now, you might be starting to see how essential camels were to Bedouin life, not just as companions, but as incredible, almost mythical creatures, designed perfectly to survive in the most unforgiving of environments. But let's dive a little deeper and talk about why camels were the ultimate survival machines. You see, camels are not only tough, they're perfectly engineered for desert life, with adaptations that go far beyond what most animals could handle. Let's start with their most famous feature, those humps. Now, contrary to what you might think, a camel's hump doesn't store water. That's a common misconception. Instead, it stores fat, which is a key to surviving in the desert. When food and water are scarce, a camel can tap into the fat stored in its humps, using it as a source of energy. This means they can go without food for weeks at a time and still be able to travel vast distances. Imagine walking across the desert for days on end without a meal. It sounds like a nightmare. Right, well, for the camel, it's just another day at the office. But it's not just about the fat in their humps. Camels are also able to withstand extreme temperatures in ways that few other animals can. Their thick, shaggy fur provides insulation, keeping them warm during the chilly nights, but also helping to protect them from the scorching heat of the day. This fur acts like a built-in air conditioner, reflecting the sun's rays and keeping the camel cool even as the temperature soars to over 120 degrees sharp, 49 degrees. And when it does get too hot, camels have an incredible ability to sweat in a way that helps regulate their body temperature. They can lose up to 25% of their body weight through sweating without suffering dehydration, a feat no other mammal could manage without severe consequences. Now, think about the camel's hooves. These aren't just your average feet. No, they're designed to handle the desert's harsh conditions. Their wide, flat feet act like natural snowshoes, spreading the camel's weight across the soft, shifting sand. This makes it easier for them to walk without sinking into the ground. Compare that to most other animals, whose hooves or feet would sink deep into the sand with every step. For the Bedouins, this meant that their camels could travel through the desert with minimal effort, saving both their energy and their time. But it's not just about the physical traits of the camel that made them indispensable to the Bedouins. The way they could function in the harsh desert environment also made them ideal companions for the nomadic lifestyle. The Bedouins were always on the move, traveling from oasis to oasis, setting up camp in new locations with every change in season or need for resources. Without camels, this would have been nearly impossible. Transporting everything the Bedouins needed to survive in the desert would have been a logistical nightmare. But with their camels, they could carry not just food and water, but also tents, tools, and everything else necessary for survival. Historians still argue about whether the nomadic lifestyle of the Bedouins could have ever been sustainable without camels. Some believe that the Bedouins were so reliant on these animals that without them, they would have been limited to smaller, more permanent settlements. Others think that the Bedouins, with their immense knowledge of the desert and natural resources, could have managed in some other way. But one thing is certain, the camel was the backbone of their nomadic culture. Another fascinating feature of the camel is its ability to go without water for long periods of time. Unlike most other animals, camels can drink vast amounts of water at once, up to 40 gallons in one go, allowing them to stock up when water is available and then survive for days without needing to drink again. Their kidneys are also specially adapted to conserve water. When they do drink, their bodies can extract nearly every drop of moisture from the water, leaving very little waste. This was essential in a desert environment where water sources are few and far between. When you think about it, camels were like the Swiss Army knives of the desert. They could carry loads, provide milk and meat, help with transportation, and even offer company in an otherwise lonely place. But it wasn't just about the practical side of things. There was something almost magical about these creatures. They were built to survive in a world that would kill most animals. And they did it with ease, reliability, and grace. The Bedouins, in turn, took immense pride in their camels, not just for what they could do, but for who they were. These animals weren't just tools. They were revered, cared for, and loved. In a way, the camel's physical prowess was a mirror of the Bedouin spirit. Both were resilient, adaptable, and capable of thriving where others would struggle. As the Bedouins faced challenges from both the desert and from other cultures, they found in the camel a companion that would stand by them through thick and thin. Together, they formed a partnership that allowed them to endure and flourish in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Historians still debate the exact role camels played in the spread of civilization through the Arabian Peninsula. Some suggest that without camels, the Bedouins wouldn't have been able to reach the far corners of the desert, making trade and interaction with other cultures much harder. Others argue that the camel was just one part of a larger system of survival and trade that included other animals and human ingenuity. Whatever the case, the camel remains one of the most iconic symbols of Bedouin life, a creature whose design was as suited to the desert as the Bedouins themselves. Now that we've touched on the incredible physical attributes of the camel, let's zoom in on the most intimate aspect of Bedouin life: the practice of camel herding. It wasn't just about owning camels. It was about mastering the sacred art of raising and guiding these animals through the desert. The Bedouins didn't simply use camels as tools. They forged a bond with them, a relationship that went beyond survival to become a cultural cornerstone. Herding camels wasn't something that could be learned overnight. It was a skill passed down through generations, and those who were best at it were often held in high regard. Much like a skilled horseman in other cultures, a Bedouin camel herder was someone who could navigate the vast stretches of the desert, ensure the safety of the herd, and even determine the best routes and areas to find water and food. But more than that, the herders' bond with the animals was an emotional connection. Bedouins didn't just control camels, they communicated with them. This was especially true when it came to the training and care of young camels, or calves, who would eventually join the herd and carry on the legacy. The training process for camels was meticulous and demanding. Young camels were carefully raised to handle the desert's challenges, learning how to carry loads, travel long distances, and survive without constant care. The herders often spent long hours with these camels, gently coaxing them to understand the movements, sounds, and commands needed for their survival. It was a delicate balance of respect and authority. A herder had to show that he was in charge, but also demonstrate care and empathy. This is why the Bedouins considered camels to be intelligent animals, capable of learning and forming lasting relationships with their herders. If you think about it, this bond was mutual. Camels weren't just docile, passive animals. Each one had its own unique personality. Some were gentle and easy to work with, while others could be stubborn or even rebellious. Yet, in every interaction, the Bedouins respected these individual traits, adapting their approach to each camel's personality. It was a two-way street. Camels would trust their herders, and herders would trust their camels, leading to a partnership that worked in harmony. Historians still debate the extent to which the relationship between Bedouins and their camels was one of true emotional attachment versus a more practical partnership. Some scholars argue that the camels were simply highly valued livestock, important and essential, but not necessarily loved in the way humans love pets. Others suggest that Bedouins saw their camels as trusted companions, almost like family members. It's likely that both perspectives hold some truth. Certainly, camels were not only valued for their practical benefits, but were deeply respected for their strength, endurance, and the role they played in the survival of the Bedouin people. This deep relationship between herders and camels was also reflected in the way Bedouins cared for the health and well-being of their camels. Like any good rancher, a Bedouin knew when his camels were sick, tired, or in need of extra attention. They understood camel behavior, recognized the signs of exhaustion or injury, and did everything they could to ensure that the animals were well rested and well nourished. For instance, camels that were particularly prized for their stamina or milk production might be given special treatment, such as extra care in feeding and bathing, or even special clothing to protect them from the harsh sun. Of course, camel herding wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes, camels would wander off in search of food or water, and herders would have to go to great lengths to track them down. In these moments, the bond between camel and herder was tested. Camels could be incredibly independent and, at times, stubborn, making them difficult to round up. But just as a herder knew how to manage a stubborn camel, the camel also knew how to handle a demanding herder. This subtle give and take was key to making sure the herd remained intact and safe. Beyond the practicalities of herding, camels were also central to the Bedouins' social and spiritual life. They were used in ceremonial events, from weddings to feasts, and sometimes even in acts of sacrifice. In these moments, camels weren't just seen as animals. They were honored guests, treated with reverence. In fact, there are many Bedouin songs and poems dedicated to camels, describing their strength, endurance, and beauty. Some of these songs celebrated the camel's role in bringing prosperity and success to the Bedouin people, while others praised the camel for its ability to endure the hardships of the desert alongside its human companions. This connection between the Bedouin and camel was also reflected in Bedouin mythology and storytelling. Camels were often depicted as heroic creatures, capable of overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. Their endurance, loyalty, and strength made them symbols of resilience and hope. Some stories even tell of camels who were so loyal to their Bedouin herders that they would never stray far from the camp, no matter how harsh the environment became. This loyalty, in turn, became part of the cultural fabric that defined Bedouin society, an ideal of steadfastness and reliability, both in the animals and the people themselves. So, it's clear that camels were far more than just transport. They were an essential part of Bedouin culture, social structure, and even mythology. The deep connection between herder and camel allowed both to survive in one of the harshest places on earth. The desert, with all its challenges, was home to the Bedouins and their camels. Together, they formed an inseparable bond, one that has lasted for centuries and continues to shape the way we view both the Bedouins and their remarkable camels. As the Bedouins roamed the vast deserts, they weren't just surviving. They were thriving by connecting distant lands, cultures, and people. And in this vast, rugged network of trade routes and oasis stops, camels played a role that went far beyond their physical endurance. The ancient Bedouins used these remarkable animals as keys to unlocking the desert's secrets, facilitating trade and cultural exchange across regions that would otherwise have been isolated. This wasn't just about hauling goods from one town to the next. It was about creating lifelines across vast stretches of inhospitable land. The Bedouins' role as traders and transporters was integral to the economies of the ancient world. When you think about the camel, it's easy to picture a lone rider trudging across the sand with a single animal. But the reality was far more complex. Bedouin caravans would travel in large groups, often with dozens or even hundreds of camels, carrying valuable goods such as spices, textiles, gold, and precious metals. These caravans formed the backbone of trade between civilizations, connecting the Arabian Peninsula to regions as far away as India, China, and the Mediterranean. Think about that for a moment. The Bedouins were like the ancient version of long-haul truck drivers. Only their trucks were camels, and the highways they traveled were the desert's long, barren stretches. But it wasn't just about moving goods. It was about the exchange of culture, ideas, and knowledge. The camels, with their incredible stamina and capacity to navigate the harsh desert terrain, were the reason these long-distance trade networks were even possible. Without camels, the infrastructure required to transport goods and people across such vast distances would have been unimaginable. The desert was far from an empty wasteland. It was a bustling highway of commerce, and the Bedouins were the ones maintaining the routes that connected different parts of the world. They knew the desert like the back of their hand, where to find water, the best routes to take, and the dangers to watch out for. In return for their efforts, the Bedouins were richly rewarded in trade goods, as well as in prestige and influence. They became trusted intermediaries, ensuring that valuable commodities reached their destination safely. Historians still debate how much the camels contributed to the success of these trade networks. Some believe that without camels, the trade routes would have been far less efficient, while others argue that the Bedouins' intimate knowledge of the desert landscape was just as important as the animals themselves. Either way, it's undeniable that camels made long-distance trade possible. Their ability to go without water for days, travel long distances, and carry heavy loads made them indispensable to the Bedouins' way of life and their role in the ancient world's economy. In addition to the goods they carried, these caravans were also responsible for transporting ideas and technologies between cultures. For instance, the Bedouins were instrumental in spreading innovations like the art of making paper and the practice of irrigation as they traveled. They brought with them not only goods for trade, but also knowledge that would have otherwise remained isolated to one region. In this way, camels were not only physical bridges between lands, but also carriers of intellectual and cultural exchange. On top of the physical benefits of using camels for trade, there were also social advantages. The caravan system allowed for the exchange of ideas, stories, and news across large regions. Camels were the conduits of this social and cultural exchange. Bedouins, by facilitating these interactions, became part of a wider network of communication that stretched across continents. These caravans became mobile meeting points where merchants, travelers, and traders could share their experiences and learn from one another. But despite the benefits, the life of a Bedouin caravan was far from easy. The desert, while it provided a reliable pathway for trade, was also filled with dangers. Sandstorms, extreme heat, and the constant risk of running out of water were always lurking. And then there was the danger posed by rival tribes and raiders who would often target these valuable caravans. These Bedouins weren't just traders. They were protectors of their own, always on the lookout for threats. It took great skill, not only to manage a caravan of camels, but to defend it from these dangers as well. Even in the face of these challenges, the camels remained the Bedouins' greatest allies. The camels' incredible ability to endure the harshest of conditions and their reliability under pressure made them invaluable in this trade-driven way of life. Bedouin traders had a unique relationship with their camels. These animals weren't just beasts of burden. They were trusted partners, ready to face any adversity alongside their owners. The importance of camels in these trade networks cannot be overstated. Without the camel, the Bedouins wouldn't have been able to establish the far-reaching trade routes that connected the East and West. These routes didn't just carry goods, they carried culture, knowledge, and life-changing innovations. Camels made the desert less of a barrier and more of a bridge, facilitating an exchange of ideas and commodities that would shape the ancient world. So, as we consider the Bedouins' vital role in connecting distant civilizations, it's impossible to ignore the camel's part in that grand story. Without these amazing animals, trade as we know it may never have flourished in the Arabian Peninsula. They didn't just help carry goods. They helped build the world as we know it today. Historians still argue the extent to which the Bedouins' trade networks could have succeeded without camels. Some believe it was an absolute necessity, while others argue that alternative methods of transport could have been developed. One thing's for sure, though. No matter which side of the debate you're on, the camels played a key role in turning the desert into a thriving highway of commerce. It's easy to imagine camels just as humble pack animals. But the truth is, these creatures were also warriors in their own right. When the Bedouins needed to protect their land or assert their power, camels were integral to the battlefield. In many ways, camels were the perfect partners for Bedouin warfare, providing a distinct advantage over enemies who relied on slower or less durable animals. In fact, camels revolutionized desert combat, offering a mobility and resilience that no other animal could. First, let's talk about speed. Camels, with their long strides and tireless stamina, were ideal for hit-and-run tactics, while other animals, like horses, could travel faster over shorter distances. Camels were built to endure long journeys over the harshest terrain. A camel could maintain a steady pace for days without tiring, which was essential for both raids and fast-moving campaigns across the desert. These desert-dwelling nomads didn't need heavy armor or siege engines. They had the camel's speed and endurance, which allowed them to strike swiftly and retreat just as quickly. But it wasn't just their speed that made camels a powerful asset in warfare. It was also their ability to carry heavy loads of equipment, weapons, and supplies. Unlike horses, camels could transport much larger amounts of gear without breaking down. A single camel could carry a heavily armed rider, along with their food, water, and other necessities, for a long-distance campaign. This allowed the Bedouins to travel light, yet still have everything they needed to wage war. Whether it was an ambush, a raid on a neighboring tribe, or a full-scale military campaign, camels were essential for moving armies across the desert without losing momentum. Camels also provided a distinct advantage in terms of their height and visibility. The Bedouin warriors would ride camels in battle, perched high above the ground and giving them a superior vantage point. This made it easier to spot approaching threats and to maneuver in the midst of the battlefield. Furthermore, riding camels added an intimidating element to the Bedouins' presence. Imagine facing an army of warriors towering over you on their camels, each rider armed and ready for combat. The sheer size and strength of the camels were enough to instill fear into their opponents. Historically, camel cavalry was often used by desert tribes to defend their territory and protect their resources. With their remarkable stamina and ability to carry heavy loads, camels allowed Bedouin fighters to keep up with the swift, fluid nature of desert warfare. One of the most remarkable aspects of camel cavalry was the way these animals were trained to stay calm and composed amidst the chaos of battle. Camels, by nature, are generally docile and steady animals, making them less likely to panic in the heat of battle compared to other animals, like horses, which could easily become skittish when faced with loud noises or sudden movements. This made camels the perfect battlefield companions for the Bedouins. Historians still argue whether camels were a truly decisive factor in Bedouin military success. Some suggest that the Bedouins' superior knowledge of the desert landscape and their ability to use hit-and-run tactics were far more important than the animals they rode. Others claim that the camels were absolutely essential to Bedouin warfare, providing the mobility, endurance, and psychological advantage needed to overpower their adversaries. Whichever way you look at it, it's clear that the Bedouins' use of camels in combat was nothing short of revolutionary. Of course, camels weren't just used for battle. They also had a significant role in post-conflict activities. Once the battle was over, the camels would help carry off the spoils of war, whether it was captured livestock, weapons, or even prisoners. Their strength and endurance meant that the Bedouins could carry their gains across vast distances without worrying about their camels tiring. And because camels were such valuable assets, they were often a symbol of victory, a reminder of the tribe's ability to conquer and endure. In some cases, camels themselves were given as gifts after a successful raid, cementing the bond between warriors and their prized animals. Yet, while the Bedouins' military prowess and their camels were formidable, they were not without their challenges. The desert could be just as dangerous to the warrior as it was to the camel. Sandstorms, extreme heat, and even hostile tribes could easily defeat an unprepared or unlucky group of Bedouins. And while camels were incredibly resilient, they were not immune to exhaustion or injury. Just as a well-trained warrior was necessary for battle, a well-trained camel was essential for ensuring the success of the campaign. A camel that was too tired, sick, or injured couldn't carry its rider or supplies, and that could turn the tide of a battle in an instant. Yet, in the face of such challenges, the Bedouins' bond with their camels remained unshakable. Whether they were transporting goods across the desert, raising herds of prized animals, or defending their land in battle, the camel was always at their side. The Bedouins knew that their survival, success, and even their identity were tied to these extraordinary animals. The camels were not just creatures of burden, they were partners in war, in trade, and in life. Historians still debate the effectiveness of camel cavalry in the broader context of ancient warfare. Some suggest that camels were used primarily for psychological warfare, offering an imposing presence that intimidated enemies long before any arrows were shot. Others argue that the speed and endurance of the camels were key tactical advantages. Whatever the case, it's clear that the Bedouins' military strategy was shaped by their camels, and in turn, these animals shaped the history of the Arabian Peninsula. It's not just about survival, trade, or warfare. Camels were, in many ways, a cornerstone of Bedouin daily life. Beyond the grand stories of battle or bustling trade caravans, camels played a quiet yet vital role in sustaining the Bedouins, both physically and spiritually. The camels weren't just beasts of burden, they were, in many ways, sources of life. Their milk, meat, and even their blood helped the Bedouins thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Let's start with camel milk. It's no exaggeration to say that camel milk was the Bedouins' lifeblood. In the desert, where resources were sparse, camel milk provided not only nutrition, but also a sense of stability. For centuries, Bedouins have relied on camel milk as a primary source of food. It's a highly nutritious liquid, packed with vitamins, minerals, and proteins. Unlike cow milk, which can spoil quickly in the heat, camel milk stays fresh longer and can be consumed even in the most remote, arid locations. Camel milk wasn't just a drink. It was a vital, daily part of the Bedouins' diet, sustaining them during long desert treks or in periods when food was scarce. And the benefits didn't stop there. Camel milk is known for its medicinal properties, too. It's been used to treat everything from digestive issues to immune deficiencies. In fact, some Bedouins even believed that camel milk could cure certain diseases, and it became a significant part of their folk medicine. Camel milk was often drunk fresh, but it was also used to make yogurt and other dairy products. The Bedouins developed an entire culinary tradition around this essential resource, creating dishes that were not only nourishing, but also deeply tied to their way of life. Some even considered camel milk a sacred gift, a symbol of the desert's ability to provide. But it wasn't just milk that the Bedouins relied on. Camel meat was also a crucial part of their diet. Although it wasn't eaten as frequently as camel milk, it served as a rich source of protein, especially during times when other food sources were scarce. When a Bedouin needed to slaughter a camel for meat, the entire animal was used. Every part of the camel had its purpose. The meat itself was cooked in a variety of ways: grilled, stewed, or even dried for preservation. Camel meat was often served during special occasions, but it was also a practical food source during long desert journeys, providing sustenance for travelers when other supplies ran low. Even more remarkable, though, is the use of camel blood. In extreme conditions, when the Bedouins found themselves in dire need of sustenance, they would harvest small amounts of blood from a camel to drink. It's a practice that might sound strange or unsettling, but it was a survival technique that enabled the Bedouins to endure when water and food were scarce. The blood, rich in iron and nutrients, helped the Bedouins maintain strength during harsh desert conditions. Although this practice wasn't done frequently, it was a crucial life-saving measure in times of desperation. The reliance on camels for sustenance in such a harsh environment also had a deeper cultural significance. Camels were viewed almost as divine providers. For the Bedouins, the camel's ability to supply both nourishment and transport in such an unforgiving landscape elevated it to a sacred status. It was a living testament to the resilience of the desert itself, able to endure, adapt, and provide for those who understood its ways. This reverence for the camel went far beyond practical needs. It was a matter of survival. Yes, but also one of respect for the creature that made survival possible in a place where few other animals could. Historians still debate the extent to which the Bedouins' diet relied on camel products. Some scholars argue that while camel milk and meat were important, they weren't as central to the Bedouin diet as modern accounts suggest. Others claim that without these resources, the Bedouins could never have thrived in the desert for so long. Either way, one thing is clear: camels were essential to Bedouin survival, offering everything from food to protection, and playing a central role in sustaining life in one of the harshest environments known to humankind. The role of the camel as a provider of food also brought about a unique relationship between the Bedouins and their animals. As with the herding practices we discussed earlier, the connection wasn't just about utility, it was about mutual respect. The camels gave the Bedouins the resources they needed to live. But the Bedouins returned that favor by caring for their camels. They fed them, protected them, and treated them with a level of respect that went beyond what most cultures reserved for livestock. This relationship was built on the understanding that the desert could be a cruel, unforgiving place. But with the camel by their side, the Bedouins could endure. What's particularly fascinating is that this relationship extended beyond the immediate survival benefits. For the Bedouins, camels weren't just physical providers. They were also emotionally and spiritually integral to their lives. The camel was a symbol of the harsh desert that the Bedouins had made their home. It represented the ability to survive, to endure, and to thrive in the most difficult of circumstances. And so, the camel's contributions to the Bedouins were not only in the physical realm, they were deeply tied to the Bedouins' identity, culture, and worldview. Historians still wonder whether the reverence the Bedouins showed for their camels was purely practical, or whether it was deeply rooted in spiritual beliefs. Some argue that the camel, being so vital to their survival, became a symbol of divine favor, a creature sent by the gods to help them survive. Others suggest that the bond between the Bedouins and their camels was rooted more in the practical aspects of desert survival, rather than any mystical reverence. Regardless of where you land in this debate, it's undeniable that the camel was central to the Bedouins' way of life, and its role in sustaining them went far beyond mere physical nourishment. As we continue to explore the Bedouin way of life, there's something deeply fascinating about how their camels weren't just essential to survival. They were at the very core of the Bedouins' culture and identity. Beyond the practical uses of camels for transport, food, and even warfare, camels were a reflection of the Bedouins' relationship with the land, with nature, and with their own traditions. This relationship, steeped in reverence and respect, helped shape their nomadic lifestyle, which in turn influenced their social customs, rituals, and beliefs. The Bedouins were, first and foremost, a nomadic people. They had a deep understanding of the land they roamed, and their way of life was intricately tied to the rhythms of the desert. This wasn't a static existence. It was about constant movement, seeking out water, finding food, and adapting to the ever-changing conditions of the desert. But none of this would have been possible without the camel. The camel allowed the Bedouins to travel across vast stretches of desert, where other animals couldn't survive, let alone carry the heavy loads that these nomadic tribes relied on. But the Bedouin lifestyle wasn't just about survival. It was a carefully cultivated way of life that reflected their values. The nomadic nature of their existence was a testament to their independence, self-sufficiency, and adaptability. And camels were a key to that independence. The Bedouins didn't just follow the seasons or the winds. They followed the routes their camels knew best. It's almost as if the desert itself had a life of its own, and the camels knew how to navigate it, guiding their owners to the most fertile land, to the oases, to the water. The relationship between the Bedouins and their camels went beyond utility. It was a bond based on mutual respect and care. The camels provided the means of mobility, which was the foundation of the Bedouin lifestyle. In exchange, the Bedouins took great care in nurturing their camels. They would ensure their camels were well fed, well cared for, and protected from harm. A sick or injured camel wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to the entire way of life. Without camels, the Bedouins would have been severely restricted in their movements and would have struggled to survive the harsh conditions of the desert. One of the most fascinating aspects of Bedouin culture is the way camels became an integral part of their rituals and social practices. A Bedouin's wealth wasn't just measured in gold or silver. It was measured in camels. A man's status was often determined by the number of camels he owned. And the more camels you had, the more respected you were in your community. A family with a large herd of camels was seen as wealthy and influential, and camels were often used in important social events, such as weddings and ceremonies. These animals weren't just economic assets. They were symbols of prosperity and success. Weddings, for instance, were one of the occasions when camels took on a special, almost ceremonial role. A bride would often receive camels as part of her dowry, signifying her future husband's ability to provide for her. These camels weren't just a gift. They were a statement of wealth and security. The more camels a man could offer, the more prestigious the marriage. And after the wedding, camels continued to play a central role in family life. Camels were frequently used to transport the bride to her new home, ensuring that the family was able to move with ease through the desert landscape. But beyond social customs, camels were also deeply embedded in the Bedouin spiritual beliefs. They weren't just viewed as useful animals, they were seen as sacred creatures. Many Bedouins believed that camels were a gift from Allah, and as such, they treated them with the utmost care and respect. This reverence extended to the way camels were handled during life and death. Some Bedouins believed that a camel's soul would live on after death, and as a result, many would perform elaborate rituals to honor their camels once they had passed. The relationship between the Bedouin and their camels wasn't just functional. It was spiritual. At the heart of this spiritual connection was the camel's role in Bedouin mythology. The camel was a symbol of endurance, resilience, and survival, the very qualities that the Bedouins themselves embodied. In Bedouin folklore, camels often took on mythical qualities. Some stories depicted camels as supernatural creatures capable of performing incredible feats, while others saw them as protectors and guardians of the desert. The camel was more than an animal. It was a representation of the Bedouins' strength and determination to overcome the challenges of the harsh desert environment. Historians still debate whether the reverence for camels was purely practical, or if it had deeper spiritual roots. Some suggest that the Bedouins' deep respect for camels was driven by the animals' sheer necessity in their lives. After all, it's hard not to revere something that ensures your survival in such a challenging environment. Others argue that the relationship was inherently spiritual, with the camel being seen as a creature that bridged the gap between the physical world and the divine. Regardless of the motivations behind it, the connection between the Bedouins and their camels was undeniably deep, affecting everything from daily routines to cultural beliefs. As the Bedouins continued their nomadic journey through the desert, camels remained the heart and soul of their existence. Without these remarkable creatures, their way of life would have been impossible. Camels provided more than just transport or sustenance. They embodied the very spirit of the Bedouin people, resilient, resourceful, and ever-moving. Their relationship with the camel wasn't just one of necessity. It was one of symbiosis, built on mutual respect and trust. While the Bedouins' reliance on camels was fundamental to their survival, their nomadic lifestyle wasn't limited solely to the physical aspects of travel or sustenance. It was also deeply tied to the rhythm of the seasons, the landscape, and the spiritual connection between the people and the land they roamed. Camels, in many ways, were the perfect companions for a life on the move, and their importance went beyond the practical. They were part of the Bedouins' identity and worldview. As the seasons shifted, so too did the Bedouins' movements, following ancient migration routes that were determined by the availability of water, grazing land, and shelter. The Bedouins' nomadic life was intricately connected to the desert's natural cycles. They followed the rains, migrating between seasonal camps, which were carefully chosen for their proximity to resources like water and pasture for their camels. This mobility was vital to the Bedouins' survival. And without camels, it would have been virtually impossible to maintain this way of life. The camels didn't just help with transport. They made it possible to cover vast stretches of desert where other forms of transport would have been impractical or unsustainable. But nomadism wasn't simply about movement for the sake of it. It was a matter of survival and tradition. Bedouins didn't just wander aimlessly. They had an intricate knowledge of the desert landscape and had mapped out travel routes that had been passed down through generations. These routes were defined by the movement of herds and the strategic need for rest stops, where water could be found. And camels were central to navigating these paths. Without camels, the Bedouins would have been constrained to a much smaller area and would have been forced to adopt a more sedentary lifestyle, which would have been disastrous for their culture. The ability of camels to navigate these routes efficiently meant that Bedouins could also carry vital supplies, like food, clothing, and tents, to keep them sheltered in even the harshest conditions. For the Bedouins, these items weren't just material possessions. They were symbols of their way of life. Their tents were not simply shelters. They were temporary homes, built with an understanding of the desert's extremes, and camels, carrying these shelters and supplies, ensured that the Bedouins could always find a place to call home, no matter how far they roamed. But nomadism wasn't just practical. It was deeply embedded in Bedouin cultural and spiritual life. The Bedouins' connection to the desert was, in many ways, a reflection of their own internal values. The desert, with its vast expanses and unforgiving conditions, represented the freedom, independence, and resilience that were at the core of Bedouin identity. To be able to roam the desert with nothing but a camel and the will to survive was to embody the spirit of the Bedouins themselves. It wasn't just about living in the desert. It was about mastering it, adapting to its challenges, and finding a way to live in harmony with the land. The camel, too, symbolized these values. The animal's ability to endure the harsh conditions of the desert made it a living embodiment of the Bedouin's own resilience. It wasn't just a beast of burden. It was a reflection of the strength and endurance required to survive in the harshest conditions imaginable. As the Bedouins traveled through the desert, their camels became more than just companions. They were the keepers of tradition, the vehicles of survival, and the symbol of a culture built on adaptability and perseverance. Historians still argue over the extent to which the Bedouins' way of life could have existed without the camel. Some suggest that the Bedouins' survival depended entirely on these animals. Without them, the nomadic way of life would have been unsustainable. Others argue that the Bedouins' deep knowledge of the land and their resourcefulness would have allowed them to adapt in other ways. The truth is likely somewhere in between. The camels were, without a doubt, indispensable to Bedouin survival. But the Bedouins' deep understanding of the desert, their resourcefulness, and their cultural traditions were equally critical to their success. There was also the issue of cultural exchange. As Bedouins moved across the desert, they encountered other peoples and cultures, which had their own ways of life and traditions. This constant movement meant that Bedouins were not isolated. They were in contact with a variety of civilizations, from those in the Arabian Peninsula to those in North Africa and beyond. The camel played a key role in this exchange. Caravans of camels would bring news, goods, and ideas from one region to another, serving as bridges between cultures that might otherwise have remained separate. This exchange was vital for the growth and prosperity of the Bedouins, who were not only traders, but also cultural emissaries. One of the most interesting aspects of Bedouin nomadism was the way it shaped the social structure of Bedouin society. Since the Bedouins were constantly on the move, their communities were often smaller and more flexible than those of settled peoples. This gave rise to a more egalitarian society, where leadership was determined by skill, wisdom, and respect rather than wealth or birthright. The camel, as a symbol of both strength and humility, played a significant role in reinforcing these values. A Bedouin leader was often someone who could demonstrate a deep understanding of the land, a strong bond with their camels, and the ability to lead their people through the ever-changing desert. In many ways, the camel was the key to the Bedouins' survival and prosperity. It wasn't just a practical tool. It was a symbol of everything that made Bedouin life possible. Without the camel, the Bedouins would have had a much harder time navigating the harsh desert, maintaining their nomadic lifestyle, and connecting with other cultures. But with the camel, the desert became a vast, navigable network of routes, a living highway that connected the Bedouins to the rest of the world. As the Bedouins continued their nomadic journey through the centuries, the camel remained their faithful companion, the backbone of their culture and society. And even today, in some parts of the world, the camel continues to serve as a symbol of resilience, endurance, and the ability to thrive in the most difficult of circumstances. As we move into the heart of Bedouin culture, it's fascinating to see how the camel's role extends beyond just the practical aspects of survival or trade. It becomes a deep part of the Bedouins' spiritual and cultural fabric. The camel's relationship with the Bedouins was not merely utilitarian. It was woven into their very sense of identity. These animals were integrated into their religious beliefs, rituals, and even their moral codes. This bond wasn't just about a shared existence in the desert. It was an inseparable connection between the people and the land. A relationship forged over centuries of adaptation, respect, and reverence. Let's begin by considering the spiritual significance of camels within Bedouin religion. While Bedouins followed Islam, their connection to the camel transcended any formal religious practices. Camels were often seen as gifts from Allah, creatures uniquely suited to the harsh desert environment, and as such, were treated with deep reverence. The camel wasn't just an animal to be used. It was something sacred, a living example of Allah's bounty and wisdom in creation. This reverence was reflected in how camels were treated. They were carefully cared for, cherished, and honored, not just for their practical contributions, but for the symbolic role they played in Bedouin life. The camel also featured prominently in Bedouin mythology and oral traditions. Many Bedouin stories, passed down through generations, involve camels in legendary tales of endurance and heroism. These stories were more than mere entertainment. They were moral lessons about the strength, endurance, and resilience required to survive in the desert. Camels, in these stories, were depicted as not just animals, but as wise and noble creatures with a deep understanding of the world. In many ways, camels were personified in Bedouin culture, embodying qualities the people admired: patience, endurance, strength, and the ability to survive in the face of adversity. In Bedouin folklore, camels were often portrayed as protectors and companions. There are numerous stories of camels carrying their riders across the desert through storms, helping them find water when none seemed to exist, or even defending them against wild predators. These camels weren't just livestock. They were seen as protectors, guiding their human companions safely through perilous journeys. In a way, these stories help to elevate the camel to the status of a sacred, almost mythological being, one who wasn't simply an animal, but a partner in the survival of the Bedouin people. One of the most profound aspects of Bedouin culture is the belief that camels were part of the land's natural order, an essential, living part of the desert ecosystem. This belief extended to the view that the camel's physical traits were divinely inspired. For example, the camel's ability to go without water for long stretches was often seen as a divine miracle. Its thick, fur-covered body protected it from the burning heat, while its broad feet prevented it from sinking into the sand. Bedouins believed that these traits weren't just physical. They were the marks of divine creation, making the camel a symbol of survival itself. This spiritual connection to the camel extended to various rituals within Bedouin life. For instance, camels played a central role in religious ceremonies, sacrifices, and festivals. During certain religious observances, camels would be slaughtered as offerings, and their meat would be shared among the tribe. This wasn't just a matter of sustenance. It was a spiritual practice, an offering to the divine, that honored the camel's contribution to the tribe's survival. It also reinforced the notion that the camel, much like the desert itself, was both a gift and a challenge, something that demanded respect and gratitude. As much as the camel was revered, the Bedouins also held a deep sense of responsibility toward these animals. A camel was not just a creature to be used and discarded. It was a living being deserving of care and respect. The bond between Bedouin and camel went beyond practicality. It was built on mutual trust. This was reflected in the way Bedouins cared for their camels, ensuring they had adequate food, rest, and protection. A sick or injured camel was treated with great care, and great effort was made to ensure that the animals received medical attention when needed. It wasn't just about the camel's usefulness. It was about the understanding that the animal's welfare was tied to the welfare of the people themselves. Historians still debate how much of the reverence Bedouins had for camels was rooted in spiritual beliefs versus practical necessity. Some suggest that camels were viewed as almost divine beings, with their survival abilities seen as miraculous gifts from Allah. Others argue that the bond was more about practicality, that camels were simply vital to the Bedouins' survival, and their reverence stemmed from this. Regardless of the exact origin of the respect for camels, there's no doubt that these animals were woven into the very fabric of Bedouin culture, influencing everything from social rituals to daily practices. Moreover, the role of camels in Bedouin society extended to their role in the family structure. For many Bedouin families, camels weren't just assets. They were considered part of the family. This wasn't just about wealth or status. It was about emotional connection. Bedouins often named their camels, and many had favorite camels with whom they shared a particularly deep bond. These camels were treated with affection, and their well-being was often a source of great pride for the Bedouins who cared for them. The bond between Bedouins and their camels was so strong that when a beloved camel died, it was often mourned deeply. The loss of a camel was not just the loss of an animal. It was the loss of a trusted companion, a partner in the harsh and unforgiving desert world. Some Bedouins even held funerals for their camels, performing rituals and offering prayers to ensure that the animal's soul was at peace. The connection between the Bedouins and their camels was undeniably complex, a mixture of spiritual reverence, practical necessity, and deep emotional attachment. As we continue to examine this relationship, it becomes clear that camels were far more than mere animals in the Bedouin world. They were symbols of endurance, strength, and survival. And their legacy continues to shape the cultural identity of the Bedouins to this day. As we continue to explore the deep bond between the Bedouins and their camels, we start to see the full scope of how camels influenced not just the daily survival of the Bedouins, but also their cultural practices and worldview. The Bedouins' relationship with camels wasn't confined to the practicalities of survival. It was also reflected in their spirituality, art, and the way they viewed the world around them. This connection wasn't just a matter of physical reliance. It was an emotional and psychological bond that became embedded in their very identity. The camel, as much as it was an animal, also became a central figure in Bedouin poetry, storytelling, and the broader cultural imagination. One of the most striking aspects of the Bedouins' relationship with camels is how deeply camels are embedded in their oral traditions. Bedouin poetry, for example, is full of references to camels, with these animals often taking center stage in epic tales that celebrate the strength, endurance, and wisdom required to navigate the desert. These poems were more than just stories. They were lessons in survival, resilience, and the Bedouins' deep connection to the land. Camels, in these poems, weren't just animals. They were symbols of the Bedouins' ability to endure the harshest of conditions and still emerge victorious. Poets would often speak of camels in a way that elevated them to a heroic status. A camel that could cross a desert with its rider, endure scorching heat without faltering, or find water in the driest places was not just a tool for survival. It was a hero. Through these poems, the camel became more than an animal. It became a symbol of hope, strength, and tenacity. The camel, in Bedouin poetry, was a reflection of the Bedouin spirit itself, resilient, proud, and capable of thriving against all odds. Beyond poetry, camels also figured prominently in Bedouin stories and legends. In these tales, camels were often depicted as wise and noble creatures that guided their human companions through the desert. Some stories described camels that could predict sandstorms, lead their owners to hidden sources of water, or carry their riders through dangerous terrain when all seemed lost. In these legends, the camel wasn't just an animal. It was a partner in the journey of life, a being with its own wisdom and purpose. Historians still debate the cultural significance of camels in these stories, whether they were meant to illustrate the animal's importance to survival, or whether they were a reflection of the Bedouins' idealized image of themselves and their connection to the desert. Some scholars believe these stories were a way of immortalizing the camel as more than just an animal, giving it a place in the Bedouin mythology as a symbol of endurance and spiritual strength. Others argue that the stories were simply a reflection of the practical reality of life in the desert, where the camel's contributions to survival were so profound that they became woven into the fabric of Bedouin cultural identity. Whatever the case, it's clear that camels played a central role in shaping the Bedouins' worldview. The relationship between Bedouins and their camels was more than a practical one. It was a deeply emotional and cultural bond that transcended survival. Camels were not just tools or animals. They were partners, guides, and symbols of everything the Bedouins valued: endurance, resilience, and the ability to survive and thrive in the harshest of environments. It's also worth noting that camels weren't just central to the Bedouins' past. They continue to hold an important place in their modern lives. While the traditional nomadic lifestyle of the Bedouins has diminished over the years, many Bedouin communities continue to raise and care for camels. In some parts of the world, camel breeding and racing have even evolved into lucrative industries, carrying forward the traditions of the past while adapting to modern realities. Camel racing, in particular, has become a beloved sport in many Middle Eastern countries. The Bedouins' historical connection to camels is still alive and well in these races, which are often held in large, modern stadiums, attracting spectators from around the world. While the nature of the sport has changed, with robotic jockeys replacing human riders, the camel remains the star of the show. The racing camels themselves are often bred for speed and stamina, just as the Bedouins once bred camels for endurance across the desert. It's a continuation of the Bedouins' ancient relationship with the camel, now celebrated in a more contemporary context. But even as camels continue to play a role in the modern world, their cultural and symbolic significance for the Bedouins has remained unchanged. The camel continues to represent strength, survival, and resilience, qualities that are still integral to Bedouin identity. In many ways, the camel is a living reminder of a time when the Bedouins' way of life was inseparable from the desert landscape, and their survival depended on their ability to adapt and endure. The continued importance of camels in the Bedouins' modern world underscores the timeless nature of their connection to these animals. The camel is not just a relic of the past. It is an enduring symbol of a culture that has survived and thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Whether through the tradition of camel racing or through the continued care and breeding of camels, the Bedouins' relationship with these remarkable animals remains as strong as ever. Historians still argue about the future of the Bedouin way of life and whether the modern world will allow this deep connection to survive. Some believe that the rise of modern technology and urbanization will push the Bedouins further away from their traditional practices. Others argue that the Bedouins will continue to adapt, integrating the camel into modern life in new ways, as they have done for centuries. Regardless of what the future holds, one thing is certain: the camel will remain an enduring symbol of the Bedouin spirit, a link between past and present, and a living testament to the resilience and adaptability of a people who have long thrived in the desert. As the Bedouins' relationship with camels evolved over the centuries, so too did their cultural practices, including how they adapted to the changing world around them. The camel, once the central figure in their nomadic existence, became more of a symbol of their heritage and resilience as the Bedouin way of life shifted in the modern era. Yet, even with the rise of cities, new technologies, and modern comforts, the camel continues to hold an unshakable place in the hearts and minds of the Bedouins. Their connection to the camel, far from fading into history, has simply taken on new forms. In the past, Bedouins roamed the desert, following traditional migration routes that have been passed down for generations. These routes, which connected oases, grazing lands, and water sources, were vital to the survival of the Bedouins and their herds. The camels were at the core of this system, serving as the primary mode of transportation for the Bedouins' households, their belongings, and their livestock. In this nomadic existence, everything the Bedouins needed to survive in the desert was carried by their camels. From their tents and cooking equipment to their food, water, and even weapons. This dependency created an incredibly close bond between the Bedouins and their camels, with the animals not just providing practical help, but also embodying the essence of the Bedouin way of life. However, as the world changed, so did the Bedouin lifestyle. The discovery of oil in the Arabian Peninsula brought rapid modernization, with new roads, infrastructure, and settlements sprouting up across the once vast expanses of desert. The camel, once indispensable for daily life, gradually found itself replaced by modern vehicles. Cars, trucks, and even airplanes became the new means of transportation for the Bedouins, enabling them to travel faster and farther without relying on their trusted camels. Yet, even as the camel's role in daily survival diminished, it continued to be a symbol of the Bedouin spirit. The camel was more than just a means of transport. It was a cultural icon, a representation of the Bedouins' deep connection to the desert and their ability to endure and thrive in its harsh conditions. The modern Bedouin, while embracing the conveniences of contemporary life, still holds the camel in high regard, and it remains central to their identity, even if not always physically present in the same way. Camel breeding, once essential for transportation, has evolved into a popular and profitable industry. Bedouins who once bred camels for survival now raise them for shows, races, and other competitions. Camel racing, particularly in the Gulf countries, has become a highly popular sport, attracting large crowds and significant investments. The Bedouins' ancient tradition of camel breeding has thus been preserved, albeit in a new and competitive form. The camels used for racing are prized for their speed and agility, and owners go to great lengths to train and care for them, ensuring that they are in peak physical condition. Some of these racing camels have fetched millions of dollars, highlighting the ongoing importance of the animal in Bedouin culture, albeit in a more commercialized manner. While camel racing may seem like a modern evolution of the Bedouins' connection to their camels, it's also a way of preserving their heritage. The races, festivals, and competitions that celebrate the camel's role in Bedouin society help keep the traditions alive, while also providing an avenue for younger generations to connect with their past. It's a way to honor the camel, not just as a tool for survival, but as a cherished part of their cultural legacy. And while the camels in these races may no longer be used for daily travel across the desert, they still represent the qualities that the Bedouins hold dear: endurance, strength, resilience, and the will to survive. In many ways, the modern Bedouin's relationship with camels can be seen as a reflection of the broader process of adaptation and survival in a rapidly changing world. Just as the Bedouins have adapted to the modern era, so too have they found new ways to keep their connection to the camel alive. The animals may no longer be central to their daily lives in the same way, but they continue to be a powerful symbol of the Bedouins' enduring spirit, reminding them of a time when survival in the desert was a constant challenge. And the camel was their steadfast companion in that struggle. As we look to the future, it's clear that the camel will continue to play a role in Bedouin life, though perhaps in a different form than it did in the past. While the traditional nomadic lifestyle may no longer be as prevalent, the camel remains a powerful symbol of resilience, endurance, and strength. Whether through camel racing, breeding, or simply as a cultural icon, the camel's legacy endures. It is a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, certain values and connections remain unbreakable. The bond between the Bedouins and their camels is one of those connections, a lasting testament to the resilience and adaptability of a people who have survived and thrived against all odds. Historians still debate the long-term impact of modernization on the Bedouins' traditional ways of life. Some argue that, as the desert is increasingly integrated into the global economy, the Bedouins may lose touch with the very customs and traditions that have defined them for centuries. Others suggest that the Bedouins will continue to adapt, integrating their cultural heritage into modern life in innovative ways. Either way, one thing remains clear: the camel will always be a central figure in the Bedouin story, a symbol of their strength and survival through the ages. As we look back over the journey we've taken through Bedouin history, one thing is unmistakable. The camel's role in Bedouin life was not just that of a companion or tool. It was integral to their very existence. The camel, as a symbol of survival, resilience, and adaptability, was a living testament to the Bedouins' ability to thrive in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. But as we explore the Bedouins' evolving relationship with these creatures, it becomes clear that the camel's legacy isn't just a matter of the past. It's very much a part of the Bedouins' present and future. In the 21st century, the Bedouin way of life has changed dramatically. The rise of urbanization, global economies, and modern technologies has drastically transformed the landscape in which the Bedouins live. The vast stretches of desert where they once roamed freely are now dotted with roads, cities, and oil fields. Yet, in the midst of these changes, the camel continues to occupy a central place in Bedouin culture. Though no longer essential for survival in the way it once was, the camel still carries with it a deep cultural significance. For many Bedouins today, camels remain symbols of pride and identity, a living link to their ancestors and the traditional ways of life that once defined them. In this modern era, the camel is no longer primarily used for transport or as a source of sustenance, but it is still at the heart of the Bedouins' self-image. Camel racing, breeding, and even camel beauty contests have become major industries in parts of the Arabian Peninsula, highlighting the continued importance of camels in Bedouin society. These events not only celebrate the beauty and strength of the animals, but also honor the Bedouins' historical connection to these creatures. The rise of camel racing as a sport is one of the most striking examples of how the Bedouins have adapted their traditional bond with camels to the modern world. This ancient practice, which once served as a practical way for Bedouins to test the endurance and speed of their camels, has now become a highly commercialized event. Wealthy sponsors, modern technology, and large-scale arenas have transformed camel racing into a spectacle watched by thousands. Yet, despite these modern trappings, the spirit of the ancient tradition remains. Camels continue to embody the same values of endurance, resilience, and survival that made them central to Bedouin life centuries ago. But beyond the spectacle of racing, there are also Bedouin communities that continue to breed camels for more traditional purposes. Some families still rely on camels for their milk and meat, which remain essential parts of the Bedouin diet. Camel milk, in particular, is experiencing a resurgence in popularity, not only within Bedouin communities, but also in the wider world, as it's recognized for its numerous health benefits. Camel milk is increasingly marketed as a superfood, touted for its potential to improve immunity and treat a variety of health issues. It's another testament to the enduring legacy of the camel, as it continues to provide for the Bedouins in ways both old and new. While the camel's role in day-to-day survival may have diminished, its symbolic presence has only grown stronger. Camels are now often used in cultural festivals, religious ceremonies, and even as part of the tourist industry, where visitors can experience a slice of traditional Bedouin life. These camels, often treated like royalty by their owners, are a reminder of the deep connection between the Bedouins and the desert, a connection that has survived despite the sweeping changes of the modern world. And let's not forget the symbolic power of the camel in Bedouin storytelling and art. The camel continues to appear in contemporary literature, music, and visual art, where it's often portrayed as a symbol of endurance, strength, and the timeless bond between man and nature. In many ways, the camel is the perfect metaphor for the Bedouin experience, surviving, thriving, and adapting through the centuries, no matter the challenges posed by the environment or the world around them. Despite all the changes in the Bedouins' way of life, the camel remains an anchor for many communities. Some Bedouins still practice a form of semi-nomadic living, traveling between grazing lands and oases, though this lifestyle is now far more restricted than it once was. In some areas, the camel is still used for transport, albeit in a more limited capacity. But even in these modern adaptations, the camel remains a vital part of the Bedouins' cultural heritage, connecting them to their past while allowing them to move forward in the world. Historians continue to ponder the long-term future of the Bedouins and their traditional ways of life. As modernization continues to reshape the Middle East, some fear that the Bedouin identity will be lost, overshadowed by the urbanization and globalization that have transformed much of the region. Yet, the enduring presence of the camel suggests that the Bedouins are far from ready to abandon their roots. In fact, the way they've adapted the camel to modern life is a testament to their resilience and ability to evolve, while preserving the aspects of their culture that matter most. In a world that often seems to be moving faster and faster, the Bedouins' connection to the camel remains a grounding force, whether through camel racing, breeding, or cultural events. The camel continues to be a living link to the past, a symbol of the Bedouins' strength, resilience, and enduring spirit. It is a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, there are elements of identity, tradition, and connection that will always remain, just as the camel, with its long history of endurance and survival, will continue to stand as a symbol of all that the Bedouins have fought to preserve. As we near the final chapters of the Bedouins' journey, it's worth reflecting on the enduring legacy of camels in shaping not only their past, but their present and future. What started as a vital tool for survival, trade, and warfare has transformed into a cultural symbol that endures through the generations. The camel, now perhaps less central to daily survival in the desert, has become even more iconic. It represents not just the history of the Bedouins, but their ability to adapt to an ever-changing world, to evolve and integrate tradition with modernity. Looking at the role of camels in modern Bedouin life, one striking feature is how they continue to symbolize a kind of resilience and connection to the past. The nomadic lifestyle, which was once a necessity for survival, has largely faded, but elements of it are still alive in the hearts and practices of the Bedouins. Although the rapid growth of cities, technological advancement, and modernization have reshaped the landscape, the camel remains a constant thread connecting the Bedouins to their rich history. As we've seen with camel racing and breeding competitions, these ancient practices have been transformed into industries that both preserve the Bedouins' traditional connection to their animals and provide economic opportunities. Take, for example, the camel races held in places like the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. These events attract huge crowds and are even broadcasted globally. The camels that race in these events are bred for speed, trained meticulously, and treated with the highest regard. The traditional practice of using camels for transport or as a livelihood has evolved into a major cultural spectacle. The prize-winning camels are not only symbols of physical endurance, but also of cultural pride. The races, with their large, expensive prize pools, have become more than just a sport. They are a continuation of a tradition that dates back centuries. Through them, the Bedouins have managed to adapt their relationship with camels to modern forms of entertainment, while still maintaining the reverence for the animal that has been so deeply ingrained in their identity. However, while these modern adaptations of camel culture are celebrated, there are still pockets of Bedouin communities where camels are an essential part of life. In some rural areas of the Arabian Peninsula, camels are still used for transportation in places where roads may be difficult to navigate by vehicle. The camel's ability to carry heavy loads, traverse the rugged terrain, and survive without constant access to water makes it a valuable asset in these more remote regions. Even in modern times, some Bedouins continue to rely on camels for milk, meat, and leather, foods and materials that remain central to their way of life. Interestingly, the camel also continues to be part of Bedouin religious and spiritual practices. Many Bedouins still hold on to the belief that the camel, as a gift from Allah, plays a vital role in maintaining their connection to the divine. In some parts of the world, camels are used in religious festivals, including sacrifices and rituals, which honor the camel's sacred place in Bedouin culture. The camel's endurance, ability to withstand hardship, and its role in facilitating the survival of the Bedouins have led to its reverence as a creature deserving of spiritual respect. Even with this ongoing reverence, however, the camel's role is no longer the central element of Bedouin life that it once was. As more and more Bedouins transition into urban areas, the challenges of desert life fade into the background, and with it, the need for camels as an essential part of survival. Modern Bedouins, like many indigenous groups around the world, face the challenge of holding on to their cultural heritage while navigating the realities of modern life. But as the camel remains a symbol of their identity, so too does the awareness that their culture is evolving in ways that honor both the past and the future. So, what does the future hold for the Bedouins and their camels historians? Sociologists and anthropologists still debate this question. Some believe that the transition to modern life will eventually lead to the gradual fading of the traditional Bedouin lifestyle, with fewer people remaining in the desert, fewer camels used for practical purposes, and less cultural emphasis placed on the animals. Others suggest that the connection to camels will persist, but in different forms, such as through the continued prominence of camel racing, tourism, and cultural preservation. It's also possible that, as global interest in sustainable farming and animal husbandry grows, the camel may once again find its place in practical agriculture, potentially offering a more environmentally friendly alternative to traditional livestock in certain regions. One thing is certain: the camel's legacy, deeply embedded in the Bedouins' identity and history, will never be forgotten. While their role in day-to-day life may evolve, their symbolic significance will endure. The camel represents a life that has withstood centuries of desert winds, a culture that has adapted and survived, and a people who continue to honor their past even as they navigate the future. At the heart of it all is the enduring partnership between the Bedouins and the camel, one that began thousands of years ago and continues to shape their culture and identity today. The camel's journey, much like the Bedouins, is far from over. It's a journey of survival, strength, and resilience that has and will continue to transcend generations. Historians will continue to analyze the shifting dynamics of Bedouin life, especially as they evolve in the face of modernity. Whether camels remain a central feature of their way of life or merely a symbolic reminder of their past. The bond between the Bedouins and camels will forever be a cornerstone of Bedouin history. And as long as camels continue to race across the dunes, carry burdens, and endure in the desert, their legacy will remain, a lasting tribute to the strength of the Bedouin spirit. As we now bring our journey through the rich history of the Bedouins and their unwavering bond with camels to a close, it's important to take a step back and reflect on the broader meaning of this relationship. The camel, that resilient creature of the desert, is more than just an animal. It is a symbol of endurance, survival, and the deep connection between the Bedouin people and the harsh yet beautiful environment they call home. Over the centuries, as the Bedouins' way of life has evolved, the camel has remained a constant, an enduring symbol of their resilience in the face of adversity. In today's world, where much of the traditional Bedouin lifestyle has given way to modernity, the camel continues to hold a place of reverence in their hearts. While the desert, with its harsh landscape and unforgiving conditions, is no longer the sole domain of the Bedouins, the lessons of survival, endurance, and adaptation that camels represent still resonate deeply within the community. The camel's ability to navigate the desert's shifting dunes, to carry its load through the hottest days and coldest nights, mirrors the Bedouin's own journey, one of adaptability, strength, and a profound connection to the land. The camel, while no longer central to daily survival in the same way it once was, still plays a pivotal role in preserving the Bedouin identity. Whether through camel racing, cultural festivals, or even modern agricultural practices, the camel remains a vital link to the past. It connects the Bedouins to their ancestors, reminding them of the generations that relied on these remarkable creatures to navigate the unforgiving desert. And as long as the camel continues to be part of their world, the Bedouins' bond with the animal will remain unbroken, a lasting tribute to their strength, adaptability, and deep respect for the land and its creatures. As the world changes around them, the Bedouins have adapted in ways that honor both their heritage and their future. The camel, far from being relegated to the past, has found new life in modern traditions, from the high-speed excitement of camel racing to the continued importance of camels in religious and cultural ceremonies. These new forms of interaction with camels serve as a reminder that, while the way of life may have changed, the values that camels embody, resilience, endurance, and the capacity to adapt, are timeless. Through these practices, the Bedouins have found a way to honor their past while embracing the opportunities of the present. The camel is no longer just a means of survival. It has become a symbol of cultural pride, a living testament to the Bedouins' ability to thrive against all odds. Even in the face of rapid modernization, the camel endures as a symbol of hope, strength, and connection to the past. In many ways, the story of the Bedouins and their camels is not just a tale of survival, but a narrative of transformation. The camel was once central to every aspect of Bedouin life, from transport to food, from warfare to trade. Yet, even as the role of the camel has shifted with the passage of time, it has never ceased to be a powerful symbol of the Bedouins' connection to the land and to their ancestors. The camel, in all its strength and endurance, will continue to serve as a reminder of the Bedouins' resilience in the face of change, their capacity to adapt to new challenges, and their unbroken connection to the desert that shaped them. As we close tonight's journey, let us remember the lessons that the camel, this steadfast creature of the desert, has taught the Bedouins over the centuries. It's a lesson of survival, of strength, and of enduring partnership. Through the camel, the Bedouins learned to not only survive the desert, but to thrive within it. And as long as the camel continues to walk across the desert sands, the Bedouins will carry with them the spirit of those who came before, adapting, evolving, and honoring the past while facing the future. Now, as you drift off, let the image of the camel, the proud, enduring symbol of survival and strength, take root in your thoughts. Let it remind you that resilience is not just about overcoming obstacles. It's about adapting, evolving, and forging connections that last through time. The camel, as the Bedouins have shown us, is not just an animal. It's a living testament to the power of endurance, a creature that has walked with the Bedouins through centuries of change and will continue to do so for many more to come.